Running Wild with Christine, Sex, Success, and Other Slippery Rabbit Holes. Episode 5, the one with Girl on the Net. Hi, welcome back to Running with Christine. As always, I'm Christine Wild, author of newly released memoir called Just Bad Timing, that hopefully by now you should know a little bit about. Today we are here, as always, to talk about things that we might not always have a space to talk about or don't know who to ask or how to bring up certain topics. I am really happy to say that we are with Girl on the Net today, UK's smartest and most controversial sex blogger. She is going to talk with us about all kinds of things, writing about sex, censorship, and her latest project at Eroticon. Hi, Girl on the Net.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome. Thanks for coming. Basically, I'm really excited to talk to you because you published a guest post of mine, and I've been reading yours for quite some time, and it's really nice to be able to chat with people who write about sex.
Yeah, definitely. It's always nice to find other people. Whenever I see a new blogger kind of crop up offering me a guest blog, I'm like, oh, that's great, now I can expand my list. I think there's loads of us now. It's a kind of a nice little community of sex writers.
There is, and it's so exciting to see all the different kinds of sex writing. I'm like fascinated. I'm always like, ooh, that is so cool, and how very personal each style is.
Yeah, definitely. It's always good. It's really interesting to see different people's takes on the same thing. I find it particularly with sex toy reviewers, when they're all writing about one particular toy and you get one person who'll love it and then one person who'll really hate it. It's quite a nice way to show the just broad spectrum of what people like sexually. Yeah, more sex bloggers the merrier. That's what I reckon.
Exactly, and it sort of counters the mainstream ways of this is how you have an orgasm or this is how you masturbate. And you're like, no, that's no. That's not how it works. I mean, that's how you masturbate. That's cool, but
Yeah, no, I think it's one of the cool things about the internet and social media, and the fact that we're not, when it comes to sex advice, we're not being preached to by people who have this massive platform, or people who are the kind of people who get picked up for writing in the mainstream press.
Yeah.
Now we've got tons of people who can put their own experiences online, and that all kind of bubbles up to the top.
Yeah.
So you don't get this, here are 10 things you have to do to please someone in bed. You get lots of different stories with different ideas and talking about how different people respond differently to various different sexual things.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's one of the things that's made it, that's sort of brought on our adult sex education a bit, is the fact that adults can write their own sex blogs.
Absolutely. And I still have sort of mixed feelings about sex advice, because it's starting to happen to me recently, quite a lot of getting random messages of how or why, or is this how I is this normal, or how do I feel, or how do I do blah blah blah, and I'm just am I qualified to answer these questions?
Yeah. Do you know, I feel exactly the same. I worry about that as well, because I get obviously lots of people saying, one of the questions I get asked the most is basically, it boils down to, how do I get laid? People will email me and say, oh, well, I'm really shy and I really want to have sex, and I've been, thinking about it for ages, but I just can't get anyone to have sex with me. How do I get laid? And I'm like, shit, well, the thing is, it's just going to really depend on who you want to shag and what sort of person you are, and what kind of environments you're putting yourself in. What I would respond to in terms of someone chatting me up might be wildly different to what your dream person would respond to.
Exactly. And I find it's such a weird reflex thing that we have of thinking that nothing, that, I don't know how to say this because words sort of fight me, but we don't realize that everything is contextual. We're taught that, there's a list, there's rules, there's grammar to it. And then you get thrown in real life and you're like, actually, that's not really how it works. Everything is so contextual.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. And I think as well, there are lots of people, particularly young men, who've kind of been taught that, well, if you do X, Y, and Z, then you will get laid. And the answer is no, you won't necessarily. There are lots of things you can do to kind of improve your chances of getting laid. So, be respectful to people, put yourself out there, go and meet lots of people. But at the end of the day, it might still be the case that you just don't find someone who fancies you.
Yeah.
And one of the things, I get quite a lot of frustrated young men going, oh, why don't I meet women who want to bone me like you want to bone guys?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I've met loads of guys I don't want to bone.
Yeah.
And it's all going to depend on like the spark that you have and like how you hit it off and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly. And I've also met lots of guys who don't want to bone me, like, personally. So it's like, it's not, you know. But at the same time, I find it, you know, the one I get a lot is like, so you say size doesn't matter, but like I have a small dick and so blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, it doesn't matter. Well, it does, but it does, like, everyone's vagina is different, first of all. And, you know, all of these sort of standard pigeonholed ways of thinking about sex. And this is why I'm so excited about, you know, sex blogging and sex writing in general. And the fact that I'm seeing more and more nonfiction, just, you know, like real life stuff, because it completely sort of flips the script that we're used to reading.
Yeah, oh, definitely. And I think it's that, like, on the issue of size, hearing those real stories, like, one of the things that I think I just didn't know, even until I've been blogging for, like, a couple of years before I really kind of internalized this, is the idea that sex doesn't just have to be about something going in me, like, for want of a better word. Like, I think we focus, particularly in like the mainstream media, there's a lot of, it's all very heteronormative, very focused on penetrative sex. And so I'm not surprised that a lot of people who have smaller dicks or who, you know, have who don't particularly like penetrative sex or find that they prefer other things, I'm not surprised that they go through life with a lot of hang-ups, because so much of our culture is kind of designed to just scream that message at them that, like, you have to have a massive cock and sex is all about the cock and it's all about this.
Yeah, and also,
when actually it's not.
Exactly, and I find it very strange, because I don't know why I've learned this information very young, that sort of like vaginas tend to be like between 4 and 5 inches deep at tops, and on average, and one of the guys that was messaging me said, I find that hard to believe. I was like, you can just like look it up. But okay, thanks for doubting this like Wikipedia fact. Let me send you a screenshot. But I was like, it's not, you know, if you're watching porn, yeah, you find it hard to believe for sure. But, you know, if you actually ask people in your real life, and this is where I think the conversation is important, and this is sort of something that we're going to talk about, is the censorship part. It's very difficult to bring those conversations up, you know, in your circles and your friends and your in whatever life you lead. Even if you lead a very open life, it can be a sort of very sensitive topic. And so the real life conversations happening online, even though at the beginning I didn't really know what to make of them, now I'm like, oh, thank God, you know, like, this is so good.
Yeah, it's that kind of, I mean, I've always been quite open with my friends in talking about sex. Like, I talk about sex quite a lot with my friends, and we're kind of generally reasonably open. But I think that's not really common. And so I think there are quite a lot of people for whom they want to kind of have these conversations and ask these questions, but they can't do it with their friends or their family in real life. So that in real life, the internet's real life as well.
Yeah,
but, they can't do it with
person.
Their friends and family in meet space. So they come online and they can see these conversations happening and they can join in.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still going to be really difficult, because a lot of the time the myths that people have been taught, you've spent so long for your whole life being told this one thing, that it can take a lot of time, I think, to change your mind when you get older, and when you see that actually the world doesn't have to be like this, you know. Sex doesn't all have to be penetrative, you don't have to have a really massive dick. So yeah, I think that's like, it's one of the most valuable things about sex blogging, I think, is that we can kind of put our stories out there, start these conversations, and then people can stumble across them and go, oh wow, it's not just me.
Yeah,
like,
and it really,
I'm not the only one who feels like this.
And I feel like it really resonates. It was funny for me because I was, unlike you, was never really anonymous. Like, yeah, I have a pen name, but my face is all over, and my, you know, but the people that know me know that this is what I do. And and so at the very beginning, when I was finishing writing the book, but the blog was already up, they were like, oh, have you, I would be sitting at, you know, drinks with friends, and someone new would be there, and they'd be like, oh, have you read Christine's blog about so-and-so? And then this amazingly open conversation between strangers was happening around drinks, around something super personal or you know, explicit as hell. And it was very comfortable and open, because there was a reason to have that conversation. Sort of, there was like, you know, they had a somewhere to base it. They couldn't just bring it up out of the blue. But all of a sudden there was this, you know, article or or whatever. And so I find that it's such a nice ricochet that it sort of starts to come out of just the internet, you know?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's a great way to start conversations, and it's a good. I think there's a lot more that we need to do, and one of the things that I'm kind of. I love being able to start these conversations about sex, and particularly around kind of different niche kinks and fetishes.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of guest blogs from people with really fascinating just fetishes and sexual quirks and stuff. They're always really fun to publish, because then you get loads of comments from people going, "Oh my God, I thought I was the only one, but I'm so glad someone else likes this too."
Yeah.
So that's all brilliant, but I think there's still, like, particularly from my perspective, there's a lot of stuff that I want to get a bit better at. So, like, elevating voices of sex workers and people who kind of have different experiences to me. I think because I'm a middle-class white girl who is mostly straight and, reasonably where I have kinks, my kinks are fairly easy to sell from a porn perspective.
Yeah.
Like, it's been reasonably easy for me to get traction and get attention.
Yeah.
But there are lots of other people who have kind of different sexual tastes or different life experiences who probably wouldn't get that same boost. And so one of the things that I'm quite keen to do is, like, lift up other people. There are a lot of people in our like sex blogging community who are kind of trying to do the same thing. But I think I'm waffling a little bit. Basically, what I'm saying is it's quite nice, like, because all of these different stories are really interesting. It's nice to use your platform a bit to lift up other voices as well.
No, and I'm so grateful that you are that open. It's sometimes so difficult and disheartening, because you're, if whoever is writing about sex feels really passionately about, because everything is against you. Like the internet is against you, your social life, it can, like you talked about quite profusely in the past about how difficult it was to sort of lead that double life of doing that without anyone knowing. And then on top of that, when you're, getting some traction, then you might have some major roadblocks, like, when I'm trying to promote the book and I can't run ads. I can't, just put money towards something and be like, please promote me, because it's not safe for work, because it has adult content, because, we're still, selling burgers with massive boobs, that's not a problem. But, like, words on paper that talk about vaginas and penises, that's, like, a big no-no for some reason in our society. And so I find
it's so ridiculous. The hypocrisy of it is just almost impossible to get your head around sometimes. I've seen some of the most grotesquely offensive adverts on Facebook, adverts for, like, snake oil, basically. And then seen ads for sex toys just be completely removed. Like, you just can't really advertise sex toys on Facebook unless you happen to be a massive company that has a huge budget to go and essentially, I would guess, bribe Facebook to let them to get them to let you put your ads up. But where it's individuals, it's almost impossible to use any of the tools that you're meant that the normal businesses would just take it for granted that they could use any of these online tools.
Exactly.
Whereas any kind of sex business, we're screwed.
And so that's why it's so important to stick together, because, like you said, like, even us, I'm very relating to your description of yourself. I'm also a mostly straight middle-class white girl, but regardless of where you come from in a sort of community, that's the great part about sort of the anonymous side of sex blogging. But still, like, we have enormous resources. I personally have enormous resources in that I have the support of, like, my friends and people around me that are like, I know it's hard, but you can do it. If you already have all those challenges, plus you're in a situation where your voice is not one that sort of has a however niche market that's already in place with sites like yours, then it's it can be so discouraging. And the fact that what we write about is tied to sort of our well-being as humans is so complex. And I'm still struggling to get my mind around sort of the whole internet censorship part, because it continues to shock me every day.
Yeah, well, I mean, my main worry about it is that even when people might think they're safe, or they might think they've found a platform where they can do what they do, you're still at the risk of the platform turning around and saying, actually, we've decided that from now on we're going to get rid of sex.
Or someone reporting you or something.
Yeah, so last year the Patreon, who had previously been really supportive of sex content on its platform and adult creators, sex work, and there were a lot of sex workers who used it for either for sending clients videos directly or for doing things like porn projects.
Yeah.
And then suddenly Patreon decided, oh, actually, we're going to clarify our terms and conditions, and there were loads of people who essentially just lost a huge chunk of their income.
Yeah.
And suddenly going from, well, here's how I make my money to pay my rent, to going, oh, I might get kicked off this platform and not be able to pay my rent.
Yeah.
It's just, I feel like something needs to happen that gives a kind of a baseline of security for people.
Absolutely.
Like, if you start working on this platform, if you start doing this, then we're not gonna kick you off.
Yeah.
But then you get, government laws, so the Digital Economy Act in the UK and FOSTA or SESTA in the US, where the governments just go, no, this has something to do with sex work and we're going to shut it down.
Yeah.
It's terrifying, really terrifying.
It is, because, I find it very, the whole conversation around sex today is very baffling to me, because we're making progress, but we're taking 17 steps back every single time. And so I find that sort of pendulum swing back very terrifying, because I was speaking about this with a friend of mine, and she was just like, it was around, I can't remember what exact stage of either Me Too or Time's Up or something exciting happened. And she was like, she's very French, so it was sort of like going along her lines of general pessimism. But she was just like, I'm just waiting. I'm waiting for it to come back, blowing up in our faces. Like, just like you said, something needs to happen, but I can't even begin to sort of frame how, because every time I frame it, I can see sort of the window open, or the door open to the coming back into sort of a more puritanical response to any kind of progress.
Yeah, it is really difficult. And I think the sort of puritanical argument is so easy to make. And I think particularly with FOSTA SESTA in the US, it's been really frustrating to see so many people jumping on the bandwagon and going, well, of course we must protect trafficking victims and therefore we need to pass this law.
Yeah.
Yes, of course we need to protect trafficking victims.
Yeah.
But as they say that, what's lost there is that this law is not the best way to protect trafficking victims at all.
Exactly.
But they've got a really easy way. They can make their argument really easily, because they can say, well, if you don't support this law, then you do support sex trafficking.
Yeah, yeah.
When actually the research shows that decriminalisation of sex work is one of the best methods to kind of protect people who are being trafficked, because then
absolutely
sex workers don't feel like they can't come forward to the police to report, Anyway, but I think one of the things that needs to change is that we need politicians who actually make that argument. Like, politicians are always too scared. It's always a really difficult argument for a politician to make,
Yeah, because
actually we shouldn't ban porn. Actually, we shouldn't ban sex work. But we need politicians to really start making those arguments from a rights perspective and say, look, yes, this puritanical argument sounds quite comforting, but it's not right. But yeah, I don't know which politicians will really stick up for that, because it's such a difficult thing for them to do.
Yeah, and it's so difficult, I find, because for some reason, in every other sort of area of cultural life or healthcare, or whichever sort of side of the topic you're focusing on, there is always research or data or, science behind it. And for some reason, critical studies in sexuality, they don't hold that sort of same level of what's the word I'm looking for? Oh my God, why is my brain blanking so much? It's not as legitimate for some reason in the social understanding. So I understand how it's difficult for a politician to stand up and say that those kinds of things, but we just need to shift the language and shift the sort of social understanding of those facts. I was really lucky. I went to university in Vancouver, and there's a really, really good social justice institute with a massive critical studies in sexuality department. And so I was lucky to find that information in a sort of legitimate environment early on, as sort of my understanding of it, as, this young kid just starting in university. And the conversations I had within that environment really influenced how I think about it now. And I'm not sort of like, well, I don't know the information, so I don't know what to think.
I see what you mean. Yeah, I think there is. I mean, there are some great research going on in the sex space.
Yeah.
So I think there are a lot of brilliant, like legitimate researchers out there doing some really great work.
Absolutely.
When it comes to sex work, there's a report by Amnesty which was, I can't remember how long it took them to put together, but it was a culmination of like a couple of years' work looking into the evidence for and against decriminalisation and across lots of different countries across the world. So I think the thing is that research does exist.
Yeah, it does.
People
absolutely.
don't take it seriously because it's sex. It's all for titillation rather than, do you know what I mean? Like, I don't think the mainstream press pays good enough attention to it.
And that's so again, frustrating.
Like, good reason for writers and bloggers to talk about it more.
Exactly. Yeah, I had this amazing prof called Becky Ross, who is so fantastic, and if you're in Vancouver, go listen to her speak. But she really sort of it opened my eyes onto like the whole field, which I was never taught about, which is, you know, a main topic about sex in general. Like, where do you get that information? Where are you supposed to today have that information from and know where the resources are? And this is what I really liked about listening to your podcast on Meg-John and Justin's podcast as well, is that I was like, okay, so here is resources on top of just a conversation that challenges the normative talk that we have in mainstream media.
Oh yeah, and I'm going to plug them here, like megjohnandjustin.com. They are amazing, like adult sex education, like very consent focused. I think one of the things I really like about Meg-John and Justin is they never give you the answer that you expect.
No, I know.
Not giving you the answer that you expect, you realise that you were coming to the table with already formed ideas about what you thought the right answer was.
Absolutely.
It's really interesting. Like I've learned so much from them, and I think it's that like they've kind of made me realise that I've got so much more in my head that I was just taking for granted and assuming without ever actually examining it and going, that's kind of a weird thing for me to do.
Yeah, and it was,
why do I think that?
It was really funny for me as well, because I come from, in terms of education, I've studied a lot of philosophy and post-structuralism and, basically newer streams of thought that make you question the way that you think, the sentence structure, the language, and what the assumptions behind it are. And I still didn't check my balances when I, started using the word sex positive. I was like, oh, yeah, that totally defines me and blah, blah, blah. That works for me. And then I listened to their podcast about how they don't, caution that word as nicely. They're like, sex critical is more appropriate. And I was like, you're so right. How did I miss that? How did my brain not go there?
Yeah. But yeah, it's quite nice. Like, I like being challenged like that.
Yeah.
I think, particularly like since I started blogging, I've learned a lot about being challenged, and when I get challenged from the left or when I get challenged from the right, or when I like how I take criticism and debate. And I think basically I would like to be more like Meg-John and Justin when I debate people or tackle them, because I think they do it in such a gentle, empowering way where you go, oh, I actually feel like I'm a better person now for learning more about this.
I totally agree.
Whereas, sometimes the internet can just descend into like rage without actually ever being able to take a point on board.
Yes, I think that's sort of the distressing thing about the world today, more than the internet. And it's so funny because at the same time we're saying all this sort of like a little bit down stuff about society, but you still see those glimmers of hope in those kinds of people. And I guess that's sort of what you were saying also about Eroticon. That was really exciting for you as well to get more invested in the project.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And so we actually had Meg-John and Justin came to do a workshop at Eroticon because, in fact, we were talking about this earlier on as well, because I and a lot of other bloggers were having a chat at this event about the fact that we keep getting asked questions that basically amount to, will you give me some sex advice? And we thought it'd be really fun to have a session at Eroticon where we could ask those questions and find out from, experts how to give good sex advice. So we had Meg-John and Justin came along to give that session at Eroticon. Yeah. And that is actually available online if people want to hear it at megjohnandjustin.com.
Yeah.
But Eroticon itself is a conference for sex bloggers, erotic writers, anyone who's like erotic and creative. So we also have like podcasters, sex workers, loads of people from the sex industry come along. And it's just a really nice way to kind of share some of the things that we've learned over the last year and like kind of improve our skills so that we can talk to more people next year and kind of keep spreading the word and having more of these sexy conversations.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so how was this year?
Oh, it was great. Yeah, it was great. So we have it. It's held in Camden every year in March. I don't think we have the dates for 2019 yet because we're still trying to work them out. But it's like a 2-day event, and we do talks and workshops during the day where like erotic writers and sex bloggers and we've had like academics and loads of different people, basically lots of different people who work in sex will come and give talks and workshops during the days, and then in the evenings we go to the pub and have a bit of an ease up and just have fun with each other because we don't often get to meet each other because we all sort of sit and work behind our computers.
How was that for you in terms of, you know, someone who is renowned for being anonymous? How is it being sort of free to be yourself and sort of a safe environment and just you know, go to the pub and have that sort of one-on-one face-to-face interaction?
Oh, do you know, I love it because I don't. Yeah, like you say, because I'm anonymous, I hardly ever go to events, and so I started going to Eroticon back in like 2014, I think it was, when it was run by the previous owner, who was Ruby Kiddell. She was great. Yeah. And she invited me along, and I was like, I can't come. I'm anonymous. Like, you know, I'm really nervous about showing my face and, you know, never go to events. And she said, okay, look, we've got an anonymity policy. So basically people wear different coloured lanyards depending on whether they're happy to be photographed or whether they'd like to stay anonymous.
Amazing.
And she was like, we're really, you know, everybody's really good. Everybody's really respectful of it. Why don't you come along? And then if you like it, you know, come next year and give a talk. And I loved it. And that Eroticon, the first one that I went to, was basically what gave me the impetus and also the contacts and the work, because I made contacts there and who offered me work, basically. That's what gave me that stuff that meant I could quit my day job. Amazing. So it was hugely, hugely valuable for me, like professionally, as well as personally, because it's really good fun. But yeah, because it was so valuable for me back then, like when Ruby said, like basically she'd run it for quite a few years and she was like, I'm so knackered, I'm going to have to stop running it. So me and Molly from Molly's Daily Kiss and her husband Michael, who runs This DS Life, we were like, okay, we'll take it over and make sure that it keeps going, just because it's so valuable, particularly for people who are, you know, anonymous and wouldn't get to go to conferences normally.
Yeah, it's so necessary, events like that, because I think every other industry has their conference, has their place where they can go network in not such a sort of very serious way of like, can I please work with you, or will you work with me, or, you know, is there always an end game to this conversation? And I really like going to different industries events. Like I work at film festivals and at the Lions Creativity Festival in the south of France every year, and it's just such a nice place to be, even if you're not part of the industry, to see everyone mingling and see everyone sharing, and you can, you know, hear that the conversations are so fulfilling, and it's really necessary in each industry, and this one is a particularly tricky one. So it's nice to know that there are those safe places where you can, you know, even if you're anonymous, even if you know, you might not be telling people what you do, to actually go and be like, like,
yeah, definitely. It's nice to have that. I think as well, it's often quite isolating, isn't it? If you're writing, it's just you and your computer and your thoughts for
and
quite a lot of the time. And it's really nice to have that, you know, meeting people one-on-one and just being able to have a drink with people, because I think when I'm online, I'm always thinking about, well, it always feels like this is work. Even when I'm talking to people on Twitter, it always feels like work. Whereas doing Eroticon feels like it's just a really nice opportunity to have that social aspect as well. Yeah. And as a result, I always end up leaving Eroticon with like 1,000,001 ideas for like collaborating with people or doing new things. And I might only ever do about 10% of them, but it's a really nice place to kind of get inspired.
Yeah, amazing. And I was really gutted because I didn't know about it until I was in London in March, and it was sort of like I missed it by like 24 hours, and I was like, no.
No, we'll come along next year.
Yes, I
think
will.
We don't have the dates yet, but it will definitely be in March, and it'll be really fun. It'll be really fun. It's always good fun.
Yeah, it's really fun. Another thing that you're doing is audio porn. That's sort of one of your latest, biggest projects. if I'm correct.
So I started doing audio porn in like July last year because I had actually a couple of guys who read my blog who have visual impairments. And in fact, like 2 people said it to me separately, and that made me think, okay, I need to sort this out. But when you use a screen reader and it's reading aloud like an erotic story, it's not the sexiest thing to have just this robot voice kind of going, and then he put it in my cunt. So I was like, okay. So they said, oh, would you ever think about recording audio of some of your posts? I was like, yes, that's a great idea. So I've been recording audio of some of my filthiest blog posts. And putting that, they're all up on my site at girlonthenet.com/audioporn. And basically I fund it all through Patreon. So kind people who want to help me buy me the time essentially to do this project, because otherwise I have to spend all my time doing boring work for contract money. So they will come and chip in on Patreon, and then they vote for like the next stories that I turn into audio, and they get to choose like which stories they think are hottest, and then I turn them into audio porn and get them up on the site.
And honestly, I listened to a few of them, and it's so sort of, even if you're not coming from a place of sort of needing the audio porn, it was so relaxing actually to just like listen, because you're bombarded with visuals all the time, you know, with your phone and video and stuff, and just the way that you're going about it is, I mean, I'm not talking about the wanking after, but just even getting to a place where you put on audio and you sort of turn off the lights and turn off your eyes. It's just such a nice feeling to be able to do that nowadays. That was sort of one of my biggest struggles when people were like, oh, I really enjoy porn. I was like, I enjoy porn, but it's distracting. Like, it distracts me personally. I'm like, oh, thinking about the set decor or some stupid thought comes into my brain.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think there's something quite intimate about audio as well. Like there's that, it feels like you've got someone whispering in your ear, and it feels... Yeah, I think in a world where you're used to porn being very in your face, like particularly people who are used to the mainstream porn sites, which I'm not a massive fan of.
No.
But yeah, it's nice to have that, just be able to shut off a bit and just listen.
Yeah. And I think that's also why podcasts are becoming sort of interesting, is that you can still sort of go about your life and have your thoughts. You're not as sort of you're not as zoned into a screen. Like, I like listening to podcasts when I'm, I don't know, like folding laundry or something that's, you know, stupid. But if I'm folding laundry and watching TV, I'm not actually enjoying either activity.
Yes.
And so,
I know exactly what you mean. I'm getting really into DIY at the moment.
Yeah.
And I make stuff out of wood, which is always fun. Nice. And so I'm obsessed with podcasts because, you don't have to keep your eyes focused on one thing. Like, just being able to listen to stuff. I think it feels a lot more mindful. And it has,
I don't know if you agree, but I find that there's so much more room for me, because I'm an avid reader as a writer. I think everyone is, but it sort of lets me think more. I feel less guilty sort of drifting away into my thoughts. And I think that's sort of the richness of a good podcast, is that I can like sort of be like, wait, I need to rewind because I went into my thoughts and actually considered the things that were being said, as opposed to just consuming it without stopping to go like, what's my opinion, or what's my take, or how do I sort of fit this into, the thoughts I had about whatever topic prior.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
And so, I think that's just, so valuable nowadays, because I feel like my brain is fried 24/7. And so it's just nice to find these little sort of glimpses of like, okay, we are actually choosing what we consume. Like, we need to sort of be more aware of the choices that we make on a daily basis, and turning off the TV and doing other things that work better for you. It was funny because I listened to one of your early blog posts, but recent audio posts. That was about number 15.
Oh, yeah.
And I found it so funny because I talked in numbers at the beginning of my blog too. and
How do you feel about it now? Do you regret doing numbers at the start?
Do you know what? I still do numbers every now and then, because of the same reason that you were like, oh, I feel like giving them a name will give them sort of like existence, or like maybe they'll be more recognizable because whatever name I choose is going to have some kind of connection to them.
Yeah.
And so I totally agree with that. But I think, it was funny because this is one of the sort of, one of the negative feedbacks I got from, one of the critiques I got from one of my readers of the book is that, and he was a man, and he was like, oh, I feel like your lovers are very sort of anonymous and they don't have a lot of personality. in my head, I was like, yeah, that's normal, because like, you know, you look at TV or a series and, you know, the chicks of the main guy characters don't have a lot of personality either. So maybe it's my revenge on pop culture. But
that's a really good way of looking at it. I had exactly the same critique of because my first book, it was all numbers, and it was all numbers for exactly that reason. Really, I didn't want to. I try not to draw them in so much detail that they would be recognizable.
Yeah.
Just because I think it's not fair. Like, if I get outed and people find out who I am, like, I don't necessarily want like all of my ex-boyfriends to suddenly get loads of hassle or anything.
Yeah.
So I'd rather kind of keep them a bit anonymous. But yeah, I think you're right. Like, there are so many anonymous two-dimensional women in pop culture.
Yeah.
That I might not have drawn in super detail all of the guys I've banged. Feels, fair enough.
And this is the thing, like, it was.
I try always to like write well about people. Like,
yeah.
Make sure that people understand that at the time I really fancied them and really liked them, rather than do the sort of, ripping people to shreds when they don't have a chance to defend themselves.
Yeah, and then this is sort of my defense as well to him. It was like, well, the story is about me. Like, it's a memoir, so it's about my perception at that time. So I understand, like, there's sort of two sides to it. There's the whole part where, I'm the one choosing to expose my life, not them. So I don't feel like it gives me the right to give a lot of information about them. But secondly, also, they could be anyone. And sometimes they have been anyone, they're just the person at that time, at that spot where I needed that thing that they were giving me, or that feeling, or whatever. And so it's funny how we think of books or of blogs as sort of like this trained mind that we have for fiction, of wanting to have all the sides, whereas like when it's nonfiction, it's like, well, this is the information I had. Like, I didn't have the other side. I will never know what it was like for the other person unless they choose to tell me. So that's a really good point. Yeah, so I find it very. I laughed really loud when you were like, "Oh yeah, there's one person I have never written about," and I was like, "I think we all have that person." It's just like, what do I even think of that one? I don't even know what I would say.
I think it's really it's weird, because it's that, like, I could probably write about him, and I should probably write about him at some point, but and it's not even like, he wasn't particularly bad.
Yeah.
Like, he was great, but he's just very precious to me in quite a different way.
Yeah.
And so I feel like it would be odd to write about him.
You're protective
in the
of
same
it.
way that I write about everybody else.
Yeah.
Adds to the mystery as well, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah, I was sort of like grappling with that, because obviously if I get outed, which, is not that unlikely because I'm not trying that hard, there's sort of like the big love story in the book the book isn't a love story, so obviously it doesn't end well. But I'm like, well, that identity is the only one that can likely be exposed, because, if you know who I've dated for long periods of time, then that's, pretty easy to figure out. But all the others, I'm like, they would no one would still know who they are, because they could so easily be interchangeable, like in terms of times in my life and things that they brought. But I think that we sort of forget that, and this is one of the points that I try and make, is that there is value to every moment. There's value to not knowing about the other person. There's value to knowing everything about the other person. There's value to choosing to sort of take what you've been given and not always look for something else in it. And I think that's sort of one of the things that comes across in that critique of, like, they don't have a lot of personality. It's like, well, maybe I didn't, want to be in a place where I sort of needed to share that much about me or invest in someone else. And I think that's sort of one of the things that I like about sex blogging in general, is that you're like, ooh, I really relate to this story, even though I don't know what the context before or after was. In that moment, we all sort of have these little moments, and I think that's what makes it easiest to bring back a lot of empathy in topics that can be so easy to criticize or jump to conclusions, like you said, like, those assumptions that you're not always aware of, that you have. Yeah. And I think that's the cool part about sex bloggers that talk about their own experiences, is that you're like, I never read it with a judgy eye, even if, sometimes in my life I can be judgy because that happens. But when someone gives you their honest truth, you're like, thank you. You're not looking for the nitpicky bit,
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's really interesting to see what people do pick out and what people do critique. I got an email recently from someone basically saying I was a terrible person because of some of the things that I'd done. They'd just read my first book. They'd been reading my blog for a while, and they'd just read my first book. Now, my first book, it goes from like the very start of teenage masturbation up to the age of about 26, 27. So it includes all of my like worst and most terrible mistakes that I made when I was like a teenager or when I was at university. Like I did some terrible things. I cheated on people. I broke hearts. I was cruel and unthinking. And I also had lots of that stuff happen to me. So I'm kind of quite open about all of it. But they sent me an email basically saying, well, how do you justify doing some of this stuff? Like, how do you sit there claiming to be an ethical person when you've done all of this stuff? And I was like, well, do you know what? I think it would be kind of weird if I sat here trying to be an ethical person and refused to admit that, like, I can make mistakes. Like, I think what he wanted me to do was justify that I'd done all of this stuff and that this stuff was right. And I'm like, well, it's not right.
No.
Like, I've done some stuff that's really bad. I've done some stuff that I think I can probably make a good case for and say, well, I did this and it probably wasn't a great thing to do, but it was the best option at the time.
Yeah.
But I think that's one of the great things about nonfiction is you're writing your own story and you are able to say, do you know what? I am not a perfect person.
No, and no one is.
Yeah, exactly. If you write yourself as this like perfect, infallible character, then what you're writing is fiction.
Exactly.
And you need to be honest about
and
that.
Not very good fiction.
If you never make mistakes, then
yeah. And I think that's one of those biggest things is the refreshing part of that. I got a really good friend of mine, a very smart friend of mine, read the book recently, and she was like, she wrote me this long email about things, that she knew because we were friends and things that she didn't know, and wondered why she didn't know because we were friends. And then at some point in the book, I say that I never defined myself as a feminist. And I never did growing up. I never related. And she was like, I'm so like, cannot believe that you would say that. And I'm like, I say that. I don't say that now. I am definitely a feminist, but you have to I was just admitting the thoughts that were coming across time, and I disagree with myself a million times in the book. Like I changed my mind 100 times, and I think that's the most necessary thing today is to recognize that we all change our minds, that we all should change our minds, and that things change, and that's just what is.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely. I think it's important to be able to say, like, I got this wrong, I totally cocked this up, or I was mistaken or whatever. I mean, I think I've definitely changed a huge amount since I started blogging. Yeah. Most of it thanks to Twitter, to be honest. Like, I tend to follow a circle of people who are slightly more social justice activists than I am, and I learn loads from them, and I go, oh yeah, this thing that I've thought for years was wrong, and I should be working harder on this. And yeah, I think it's really important to be able to say, yeah, I've changed my mind.
Yeah, I'm really excited actually, because next episode is going to be with Anita Cassidy, who wrote a book called Appetite. And she talks a lot about conscious relationships, and we're going to talk about sort of the assumption behind cheating and the assumption behind monogamy and things like that. So I'm really excited to contradict myself yet again about sort of cheating and how we think about what that is or how that looks and how it comes up in our subconscious through growing up and stuff like that. So. Yeah,
that sounds fascinating.
Yeah, she's really cool. I'm really excited for that. So, yeah, so thank you for talking down some rabbit holes with me today.
Thank you. It's been great. It's been great fun.
It's been super fun. So check out GirlOnTheNet.com for all of really cool material, audio and written. And check out her books, My Not So Shameful Sex Secrets and How a Bad Girl Fell in Love. And yeah, hopefully we'll get to talk someday soon about some other stuff.
Great.
Sounds good. Thank you. Bye,
Cheers.
guys.
The podcast you just heard was recorded with Anchor. If you want to make your own, download the Android or iOS app completely free from anchor.fm/podcast. That's anchor.fm/podcast.